So you heard it on this channel, ladies and gentlemen. Category management is here for the future. Brilliant, Steph. Thank you. Listen, just a little light question before we get on to a couple of other things. Steph, where do you shop and why?
So I would love to say I only shop at local butchers or organic grocers or Harvey Nicks or Whole Foods or something like that. But, you know, I live in the middle of nowhere. So the reality is I shop around, as everybody does, mostly between Sainsbury's and Aldi. And now also goes to Asda because their petrol's cheap and they're close by, and Co-op because it's the only shop that I've got in my village. So those four because they're the closest to me. And again, every piece of research that I've ever looked at says it's still the most common deciding factor in where people shop is kind of based on ease and convenience. So, you know, it used to be based on your drive to work. So on your way home from work, which shop do you go past? There'll be a few shops that people go out of their way to go to. And on a trendy note, I have just done some online shopping direct from a food supplier, just because they were called Green Sisters. So I went in to see that shop just because it was called Green Sisters.
Fantastic, fantastic. Well, listen, there's so much choice out there, isn't there?
Yeah.
And the involvement of online in particular. So you've alluded to that a couple of times. Let's get back to negotiating. So when you were in the retailer seat, what was your hardest negotiation that you've ever had, and why was that so?
So one of the things that I wanted to do was I wanted to switch suppliers on something. So there'd been a long-standing relationship with the existing supplier. I came in with kind of a fresh pair of eyes to the business and didn't feel that this supplier was giving us either the service or the solution that we needed. And it was hard because I had to challenge internally first. And I think, again, as a supplier, we often underestimate the level of those internal conversations that take place within a retailer. So, you know, even if it's just getting a new product signed off, in our heads as a supplier, we think, oh, that's dead easy. Like the buyer can just say yes or no. Whereas actually every single retailer will have a line cap for their category, because otherwise the amount of SKUs you stock gets out of control. The pick faces in the warehouse get out of control. That's where it all kind of starts to go wrong from an operational side. So there was some really tough internal conversations because, you know, there was really strong relationships established at a very senior level within the organization. That meant that those senior stakeholders were going to have some tough negotiations with people that they worked with for a long time and they respected and they liked. And I think that's what makes a negotiation hard, whether you're a supplier or a retailer, is going in and having some really tough discussions with people that you've got an established relationship with, where ultimately you might, in this instance, we were walking away from them as a supplier. And clearly, you know, they'd worked with Aldi for years. And despite the fact that I preconditioned them for a very long time, and I was giving them lots of evidence that it wasn't the service that we were expecting, I think in the back of their minds as a supplier, they still thought they just got it in the bag because, you know, their boss knew our boss. And actually what they didn't appreciate was that even if you've got that relationship, ultimately having the right service and the right product is what really matters. So I had to challenge internally. I then had to build all of that evidence over quite a long period of time to say, it's still not improving. I'm having several conversations, it's still not improving. And then bring another supplier on board as dual supply to then clearly demonstrate the difference, to then be able to terminate the contract. So it was hard because it just wasn't pleasant. And I don't think any buyer enjoys kind of having to terminate contracts or getting to a point where they're delisting. Like as a human, you don't feel nice doing that. but you've kind of got to take a very professional point of view of it. And I think if it's done in the right way, as long as it's not a shock to the supplier, you've managed their expectations, you've given them the opportunity to almost retain the business, you've done everything that you can to help them maintain that business. If they still aren't listening to what you're telling them, then ultimately, you know, you've made the right commercial decision. It doesn't feel good, and I still don't look forward to meeting people from that organisation.
So you haven't seen these people for a while then, yeah? They've left the country stuff.
Let's say I don't think that I'm their favourite person still.
Few
So
years
and that, you know, for me as an individual, that doesn't feel nice that people would have this perception of me on the basis that I've cancelled a contract. But ultimately, you've got to do what's right. What's right for the business. So I think that for me is what made it the hardest, is just, you know, we're all human and you take it personally, and it's not a nice conversation to have. On the other hand, the supplier that I brought in probably have a very different opinion of me, and, you know, brilliant relationship still.
That's who you're still getting the Christmas cards from. Brilliant. Okay, so and on that basis, you know, often people think, you know, we talk about variables as being the oxygen of negotiation, price being one variable that we tend to focus on a lot. Outside of price, what were you looking for from a supplier to negotiate around? What were the kind of, you know, the levers that had you veer more towards supplier A or B other than price?
Yeah, and I can tell you now that negotiation that I've just given you the example of, the one that we shifted to was significantly more in terms of the price. But ultimately, and I've spoken to so many ex-colleagues about this, because we used to share, well, still do share, some videos from ex-retailers as part of our training, where the retailers rarely mention price as the things that are important to them. And that's not to say that price isn't important. Doesn't mean I can just charge whatever I like for the product. So there's got to be an acceptable price point, and I've got to have strong rationale in my recommended retails, you know, the evidence that, yeah, you can now go and sell it to your shoppers for this price. But what's really important, and I think through the pandemic became even more important, and from a lot of the conversations I'm having with suppliers at the moment, still really important, is supply, ability to supply. So my number one challenge as a retailer is I need the product, I need the amount that I've ordered on the day that I expect it in the stores that I want it to go to be on shelf, to be 100% available. Because ultimately, for me as a retailer, if it's not on the shelf, I can't sell it. So it doesn't matter what I bought it for. If it doesn't turn up, it doesn't help anybody. So the number one priority has to be service.
Sure.
You know, on time in full. That's it.
Yeah.
On top of that, it's then, is this a supplier that really demonstrates that they understand my business and that they're easy to work with? So if they're really cheap, but and they can deliver, but they just make everything feel really hard. And, you know, when things go wrong, they don't tell me about it, or I can't get hold of anybody, it makes me not want to work with them. So, you know, for me as a retailer, it was always service levels, no surprises. Like, things don't always go perfectly. Like, no retailer expects you to be 100% service on time in full. But what I do need is, if you've got some challenges, if you've got supply chain challenges, you know, whatever it might be, if you've picked up the phone and had a conversation with me in advance, so I know what's happening and I can now go and have those conversations internally, I can resolve it. If you wait until it happens for me to find out and me pick up the phone and speak to you, that's when, as a buyer, I'm going to be really upset, because chances are not only do I not have the answers, but my boss is probably coming to me for the answers, and I didn't even know that that thing was happening. So just keeping people informed to allow them to have that conversation and manage the communications up, rather than reactive conversations, I think is always really important. So service levels, communications, really understanding my business and my shoppers. So, I talk about it quite a lot, but understanding really speaking to your buyer, understanding their KPIs, understanding their timelines. When do you need this information by? Why do you need it then? I remember having brilliant proposals in September for some stuff in Christmas. And at Aldi, we nailed Christmas by July. It was all done and dusted. We were on to Easter by then. So really getting under the skin of their timelines and when are they making decisions. And somebody could have brought me the best proposal in the world in September. There's just no chance, because it's all been tied down. I've competed with all the other categories for space in store. I've got all the listings that I'm allowed to have. If it was the best thing in the world, it's just so many more internal conversations to make those changes happen that it's almost not worth it. So understanding my business, service levels, communication.
Brilliant.
Way
Great
more
advice.
Price.
Great advice for people to take count of there, Steph. Thank you. Look, as we move through these very tricky times, and let's face it, there's going to be some real choppy waters ahead. We look towards 2023. What do you think is in store for our clients? If you were a retailer now, there's an anticipation out there, Steph, I think we all know, that there's going to be some big asks coming down. There's going to be millions and millions of pounds or euros or dollars that are demanded from retailers, even with a smile on their face. So how do you think, suppliers should be preparing for that? And what do you anticipate happening in 2023 at a time when the world is really creaking with cost inflation?
So I think there's a couple of things. I think for a retailer, it's going to be that real focus on price and adding value and really being seen as the champion of the shopper over the next few years. And so we talk about it a lot when we're speaking to suppliers about objection handling and that kind of thing, but the reality is retailers are going to struggle with how do they justify putting their prices up at a time when shoppers are struggling. So I think more than ever focus on price. I think as a result of that, there's going to be some big asks of suppliers in terms of pricing support. I think that given the continued onslaught from discounters, we'll see the top four continuing to leverage that. If you work with the discounters, maybe we're not interested. So having that portfolio approach, making sure there's clear differentiation. I think they're going to kind of up the ante on where do you want to place your bets, with us or with the discounters. I think from a retailer point of view, I think there will be a renewed focus on own label, because I think for two reasons. One, because it's that kind of entry-level price point that demonstrates that they are the shopper's champion. And I also think it's differentiation. So as a retailer, if you're stocking brands, but so is everybody else, you've got no differentiation in the marketplace, because you're stocking the same can of Coke or tin of beans as everybody else. So the way that a retailer can differentiate themselves is through own label. So I think there'll be more focus on own label. So I think if you're a brand owner, you've got to really have that clear view of why is your brand worth paying more for? What's the role of your brand within the category? And then I think For retailers, it's all about loyalty. So part of that is being delivered through own label, part of that is being delivered through value. And I think increasingly we're going to see, just more and more loyalty schemes where retailers are desperately trying to get the shopper bought into more of their share of wallet. So, we've seen silly deals on Clubcard this year where, as a shopper, I used to look after Tesco years ago, and I was always very begrudging of, I'm not going to have a Clubcard because I don't want them knowing everything about me, because I've spent years analysing dunnhumby data.
Yeah.
And it got to a point a few months ago where I was buying some nappies for my sister, and I couldn't afford to not download the Clubcard app because of the price differential on the nappies between the Clubcard price and the normal price. And it was just like, oh, I hate doing this. So, and that's, from a shopper who understands what the data. So if you think, you look at that price differential, I've even noticed it in the Co-op recently with the members card, the difference in price between using your loyalty card and not becomes so great, you're forced to give them your data, which just means that retailers are going to continue to leverage those loyalty schemes, which gives them even more insight into their shoppers. So I think really having a plan that ties into those loyalty schemes with your retailer, really understanding their shoppers, using all of that data is going to be more important than ever, because I think that's the hook that they're all going to be trying to use to differentiate themselves in the market.
Yeah.
And I think the other big challenge is for any suppliers that have used a commodity rationale for CPIs over the last 12 months, and they're going to be retailers straight back on the phone to them anytime soon, given what we're seeing happening on fuel prices. So, I think that's a big challenge coming down the road as well.
Great. So some big challenges coming our way. So great. Well, it's a good thing, Steph, that we've got a few tips and processes and courses and consultative hours to help some of our suppliers along the way. So Steph Green, I am going to leave you now, let you go to Green Sisters, Co-op in the middle of nowhere. Where else did we say? Sainsbury's, bit of Tesco,
Aldi, Asda,
everywhere. Right.
Everywhere. I try and understand what's going on still, Phil.
You're a retailing dynamo. Steph, thanks ever so much for your time. Really appreciate it.
Welcome. Lovely to see you.